and Talent Development Specialist for Ramapo Catskill Library System. Thank you for being here today. This session is being recorded, and a link to the recording as well as an online evaluation form will be sent out towards the end of the week. If you do require a certificate of completion for continuing ed purposes, I'm going to place my information in the chat box. You'll go ahead and just email me at the completion of this session, and I will go ahead and issue you that certificate. So I am going to turn it over to Emily Dowie. This session is being co-sponsored by the RCLS Coalition for Library Workers of Color and RCLS. So we are so thrilled to partner with the coalition on yet again another session. So I'll turn it over to you, Emily. I'm going to mute my microphone, but if anyone has any issues, tech issues, feel free to send me a message and I will assist.
Thank you so much, Jen. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. My name is Emily Dowie, and I'm the Teen Librarian at Pro-Over Library and the President and Founder of the RCLS Coalition for Library Workers of Color. I would like to introduce you all to Rabbi Daniel Pernick from Beth Am Temple in Pro-Over, New York. Rabbi Pernick is very involved in adult education, community outreach, including working with the Pro-Over Interfaith Affiliate, and is a past president of the Rockland Board of Rabbis and the Pro-Over Interfaith Council. His strong belief is that Judaism should be fun, fulfilling, and challenging. What it should not be is boring. His involvement in temple programming at every level seeks to bring this philosophy into every aspect of temple life. Welcome, Rabbi Pernick.
Thank you.
So can you talk about the most basic beliefs of Judaism? How do most Jews view the world in terms of religion and culture?
Okay. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to everybody for showing up. It's great to see so many people here. And before I answer Emily's question and probably forget the question and she'll have to ask it again, I want to say that I think we have a lot in common. You know, it was the founder of Islam, Muhammad, who called Jews about 1,300 years ago the people of the book. And Judaism has always been very devoted to books. I assume you have some devotion to that as well. The other thing, of course, is that people have stereotyped images of librarians and people who work in and for libraries. And the same thing is true with clergy, as well as certain other professions. So I just want you to know that I'll be doing some talking today. We'll be answering questions, but my preference is really that you feel very free to ask whatever questions you want. In general, Judaism is a very open religion that certainly, as Judaism has been practiced for the past 2,000 years, is really based upon the Socratic method. It's questioning, it's debating, it's arguing, it's learning through interaction, not just through this is what I think and this is what you have to do. So don't be shy. All right, that's one of my favorite old sayings from it's either the 1st or the 2nd century. The shy student doesn't learn. So if you have a question, just ask. Okay, and now to make sure I answer your question correctly, Emily, I'll give you the chance to play Chris Wallace and ask the question again.
Okay. Can you talk about the most basic beliefs of Judaism? How do most Jews view the world in terms of religion and culture?
Okay. Well, most Jews is hard because Jews are a very, very diverse people. And some of you may be Jewish and you kind of already know that. So I think what I want to start with is just to get the numbers straight. So I've been teaching at St. Thomas Aquinas College for 19 years. And one of the things that I start every single class with, every single semester, I should say, is asking the students how many Jews by percentage are in the United States. Okay, we have 330 million people, give or take a few, in the United States. What percentage is Jewish? Now, I won't do that with you, but I can tell you that invariably the answers I get range generally from 15 to 50%, 15 to 50%. The correct answer, as some of you may know, is 1.7. All right, Jews are 1.7% of the American population, and we are 1/5 of 1% of the world's population. Okay, we're basically not even detectable. All right, people think though that the number is much, much higher. So, and part of the reason for that is that with knowledge, with learning, comes many more options to make a difference in the world. So ultimately, to answer Emily's question in a very specific yet general way, not religiously speaking, but Jews believe, whether they're very traditional religiously or very secular religiously, that our purpose here is to make a positive difference in the world and to be guided by Jewish teachings and traditions as a vehicle to do that.
Mm-hmm. And what do you want library employees to understand about each Jewish community? So could you go over like differences?
So, yeah, I mean, so let me just kind of start with an overview. And as I tell my students at Stack, I teach different courses there.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, look, there are Reform Jews, there are conservative Jews, there are Reconstructionist Jews, there are humanistic Jews, there are secular Jews. But I know that all of your questions are about the Hasidic Jews. Okay. But nonetheless, I think it's very important that people do understand, because one of the big problems that we face when people are not educated is stereotypes. Obviously, there's prejudice and discrimination, which is based on ignorance, but there's also a lot of stereotypes. So let's just talk about Rockland County. I know we may have some other counties represented here, but I don't have their numbers. Rockland County has approximately 300,000 residents. Approximately 30% of them are Jewish. Of the 30% of Rockland County that is Jewish, probably about half of that number is Orthodox. Now, the Orthodox population is extraordinarily diverse. The overwhelming majority of the Orthodox population is not Hasidic. All right, is not Hasidic. Now, I have 4 kids. 2 of them are Orthodox. And looking at all of you, they look exactly like you. They dress exactly like you. I mean, other than my son, who wears a yarmulke, which is usually all black and fits in with his hair, and most people don't even see it. He looks no different than any of you. All right. Now, the Hasidic community makes a point of looking different. That's part of their, their whole profile. And we can talk about the reasons for that. But it's important to understand that most Orthodox Jews are not Hasidic. That's true in Rockland County. It's true in New York State. It's true in the United States. And it's true in Israel, where even in Israel, a country where 75% of the people are Jewish, 12% are considered Haredi, which is generally, we can say the same thing as Hasidic. Okay, now, essentially, there are 3 main denominations of Jews. There are others, but I'm going to break it down into 3 major categories, and it won't take long. Basically, Jewish tradition says that approximately 3,330 years ago at Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the Torah. The word Torah means the teaching or the law. It consists of the first 5 books of the Bible. Orthodox Jews generally accept that belief that God gave those teachings. As a result, we are bound by them. God gave it to us, right? So you have to do it. Reform and conservative Jews don't necessarily believe that 100% of the Torah is the word of God, which gives them more flexibility in terms of accepting, rejecting, or modifying those teachings. Now, there's much more to say, but, I don't want to give you a lecture. So we'll leave it at that. Hasidic Jews, I just want to say this about who they are and where they come from, because Moses was not a Hasidic Jew. Abraham was not a Hasidic Jew. King David was not a Hasidic Jew. The whole Hasidic movement is in terms of Jewish history, it's brand new. It's 300 years old. Now, we're Americans. We say, hey, 300 years, that's, going back to the, well, not quite the Pilgrims, but certainly the beginnings of America. But the Jewish people, we trace ourselves back to Abraham and Sarah, and that's about 3,800 years ago. So as you can see, 300 years out of 3,800, we do the math, it's roughly 1 out of 13, so it's like, 8-9% of our history. Hasidic Judaism began as a very popular movement. It was an anti-intellectual movement from people who had to work for a living. And they couldn't, if you've seen the movie, the play, read the book, Fiddler on the Roof, right? Or as I used to say when growing up in Michigan, Fiddler on the Roof. And, Tevye sings the song, If I Were a Rich Man, right? So what would he do? He would hang out with all the scholars learning all day and all night. Now, that might not be our idea of what we would do if we were wealthy, but that's what he would do. Because in that part of the world, there was no status higher than being a scholar. You could be a doctor, doesn't matter. Scholar was number one. So that was it. But these people had to work 10, 12, 14 hours a day. They were milkmen, they were tailors, they sold odds and ends, and they didn't have the money to sit in the yeshiva all day and learn. And it was really kind of a class war. You had the wealthier learners, and you had the poor peasants who, said, I want to be religious, but, I just don't have the time to learn. So along came a man, he's known as the Baal Shem Tov, the Besht, and he basically told the people, you are just as good as them, and you can reach God through your spirit, through song, through dance, through enthusiasm. And they were kind of like Shakers, Quakers, through the spirit, they could reach God. And so ultimately, that was the beginning of the Hasidic movement in the early 1700s. Jews who were very poor, in many cases illiterate, but they wanted to connect with God. And through this particular leader, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement, he told them, you can connect with God just as well as those guys in the yeshiva. And that's how the movement began. And all of my answers will not be that long. But okay.
No, thank you. That's a very interesting explanation, because I didn't know how the Hasidic movement started.
Well, that's how it started. And then, for those of us, not that it's the most intellectual thing in the world, but some of you will remember the old beer commercials in the football stadiums back when football stadiums actually had fans in them. And on one side of the stadium, it was like, taste great. And the other side was less filling, right? And they're going back and forth, right? So eventually you've got these two big groups and they disagree with each other. And then they met a common enemy. Okay, and that was secularism. That was the Enlightenment. And they both realized that if they didn't join together, they would both be crushed. And so that happened about 200 years ago, that the poor peasants with the spirit really merged. It was a merger. They merged with the scholars, and that is essentially the Hasidic movement that we have today. Except when I say the Hasidic movement, there's no one Hasidic movement there. Before the Holocaust, there were hundreds, and most of them were wiped out in the Holocaust. Today, there are probably 20, maybe 25 really viable Hasidic movements. They don't all believe the same thing. They certainly don't all get along. And so anyhow, that's that.
Thank you. No, thank you for that explanation, because I'm sure we didn't all know that or understand that. And I also know that the Holocaust definitely affected that movement. And also, in the book Unorthodox, which I read, the main character talks about replacing the 6 million lost. Is that true? Are people trying to do that, or?
Well, one of the explanations, and then I see somebody asked a good question there. Part of the Hasidic movement's philosophy is to try to replace the victims of the Holocaust, because so many of those who died were certainly Orthodox, if not Hasidic. And that is one reason, not the only reason, and not even the main reason for large Hasidic families. You know, it's really, in a very similar sense, very close, similar to traditional Roman Catholic views having to do with birth control. And also, when you look at the Bible, the very first positive commandment in the Bible is be fruitful and multiply.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we see this in a lot of cultures and a lot of different religious groups, that there are reasons for the large numbers of children. And, but part of it is because, you know, so many of them and their families died during the Holocaust. Now, my in-laws, I know Emily hosted a program last week dealing with the Holocaust, which my son was speaking at. And I'm going to listen to it sometime later this week. I promise. I was not there. But my wife's parents both were from Poland, and my father-in-law was taken, I think it was on his 20th birthday or 21st birthday, and he and his wife, subsequently, you know, they weren't married at the time, they lost their entire families. I mean, my wife grew up, other than her parents and her older brother who was born after the war, she grew up with one relative. That was it. She had one relative between two sides of the family, very large families, and it was an aunt or an aunt living in Israel. So this was an example. You know, I grew up in Michigan. My family has been in America for 100 years or more. And, you know, I had grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins and, you know, the things that most people have. She grew up with one relative who she never saw because she lived in Israel. So it was, you know, it's a devastatingly different way of growing up. And so, yes, there's a very conscious effort to replace. Now, somebody had, I don't, if I can just, because I saw.
No, sure. That's what I was going to bring up in the comments.
I had a question about if there's a distinctly American Hasidic group. And the answer to that is yes, there are several. One of the things that distinguishes Hasidic Jews from, so I am a Reform rabbi. Reform Judaism is an intellectual movement that began in Germany right around 1800. All right, and it was kind of like saying we could be a good Jew, but we can be part of the modern world as well. We don't have to be Orthodox, but we can be Jewish, maintain a Jewish identity, and since they were in Germany, maintain a German identity as well. And that is now the largest Jewish movement in the United States. And it's a little trickier around the world because the movements have different names, but probably the largest in the world. And then there's a movement in between called Conservative. And so in different communities, in the Hasidic community in particular, the religious leader is called a Rebbe, not a rabbi, but a Rebbe, R-E-B-B-E. And I guess the closest term that one could use for a Rebbe would be either a guru or the Pope, a Pope who people actually followed. Because I don't mean just somebody who people revere, but you're going to do whatever this person tells you to do. And the Rebbe is a feature which is found only in Hasidic Jewish communities. The other Orthodox Jews do not have Rebbes. They have rabbis. Conservative Jews have rabbis. Reform Jews have rabbis. And, you know, sometimes they listen to us, sometimes they don't. You know, sometimes they like what we say, sometimes they don't. But the Rebbe is, you don't mess with the Rebbe. Okay, what the Rebbe says goes. All right, so that is a very unique feature. So again, my wife grew up in the Boston area, and there was the Bostoner Rebbe, who's a very well-known figure nationally, and there are others around the country. But the thing with being a Rebbe is the only way that one can become a Rebbe. So let's just, I'm going to make sure I don't mispronounce any names. So I'm taking a look here, and I'm going to take a look, and I see somebody over there named Wendy Archer. Okay, yes, Wendy, you've been, I'm picking on you. Okay, hello. I know nothing about you. Okay, but let's say Wendy Archer says, well, you know, I want to become a Rebbe. Right? Can Wendy Archer become a Rebbe? What do some of you think? Just yes, no, whatever. I don't think you've got it in you, Wendy. They're not very confident. Okay, so the first answer is yes, Wendy cannot become a Rebbe because first of all, at least from what I can tell, she is female. And in the Orthodox and certainly in the Hasidic world, being a rabbi is limited to being a male. The only way one becomes a Rebbe, it's almost like being part of the British royal family, should you want to be part of that. You have to be born, or you either have to be the son or the son-in-law of the previous Rebbe. Okay, so, and that's it. So a very, very, very famous Rebbe, whom a lot of you probably know if you've ever heard of any Rebbe, was the Rebbe in Crown Heights, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who died, I believe it was 1993. And he and his wife had no children. They died without a child, okay? Which means he is the last Rebbe of that particular group of Hasidic Jews, which are known as Lubavitch, which is the name of the community where it all originated in Eastern Europe. It's also sometimes called Chabad, all right? But he's it. There never again will be another Chabad or Lubavitch Rebbe. There will be rabbis within the movement, but he will always be the spiritual head. So that is one of the things that distinguishes. And so, like I said, you know, I know my father-in-law, I mean, he wasn't really a disciple, but he sometimes visited the Bostoner Rebbe. And there are some others around the country. But most of the Hasidic rabbis whom one will encounter are just that. They are rabbis. And rabbi is actually an academic term. All right.
So can we move on to the next question?
Absolutely.
Okay, but thank you so much for going into all that. How can we make more people aware of what tropes are anti-Semitic? There are commonly held beliefs that are extremely harmful conspiracy theories spread by organizations and people such as QAnon. How can we as library workers educate people and create more awareness?
So that's a really tough question, because I think any of us who work with people in any variety of assisting people, you know, for example, we know that you really cannot help a person who is a substance abuser or who has many other types of issues unless they're ready to be helped. You know, so it's very, very difficult, especially in our extraordinarily polarized society right now, to get through to somebody who isn't receptive. You know, it's just going to bounce right off. Mm-hmm. However, the more a message gets out, I think, the more likely one is to have some measure of success. So I think it's just really, one can put the facts out there, but there are people who are not prepared to accept the facts. Now, they might have emotional reasons for it. It might have to do with a family history or things that, you know, in their particular background. And I'm saying this not just with anti-Semitism, but with almost anything. It could have to do with mental illness. It could have to do with almost anything. And, you know, one of the sermons I was giving on Rosh Hashanah had to do just with the idea of accepting people for where they are. And I think probably all of you are part of social groups, whether it's family, friends, neighbors, etc., where there are people who disagree with certain things that you believe very, very strongly. And you've probably tried to convince them, and it's just not getting through. So I think it's important to always be part of the conversation because, so I always include sports in everything I talk about, right? Usually sports and Seinfeld, but Seinfeld is not quite as relevant as it used to be. But Michael Jordan, okay, the basketball player, he always, when he would be in a hotel and the team was arriving or leaving, and he was always dressed perfectly, like in a suit, a tie, just, other guys were in sweats and whatever. He always was, dressed to impress. And people asked him, why are you dressed like that? And he said, there's going to be some kid someday, and this is going to be the one time in his entire life where he sees me live, or she sees me live. And I want them to, this is Michael Jordan, not some guy wearing, just junky clothes and, looking like a slob or whatever. So I think one of the things that I have learned as a rabbi is that anytime I talk, even if I think people aren't listening, and certainly this applies to kids, any of you who have taught kids, sometimes they're all over the place. And then like a week later, they repeat something that you said to them. And it's like, how did you know that? It's like, well, you said it. It's like, I didn't think you were listening. It's like, yeah, I heard you. So we never know what is being processed. Mm-hmm. So I think it's incumbent upon us to at least put the message out there, to counter hateful speech. And, we can't control how it's going to be responded to. But our job is to make sure that we put the message that we feel is accurate out there.
So that's what you would recommend we do as library workers, as librarians, to just keep on trying to put the message out there no matter how it's received.
Okay, so, as somebody working in a library, it's not your job to go up to people and, kind of like, by the way, have you heard the good news? Are you aware? You can't go proselytizing. But if somebody is asking you a question or I heard that, well, then obviously, but to me, our job is to present knowledge.
Yeah.
Our job is not to tell people what they have to think and what they have to believe. Okay, a Rebbe can do that, but there aren't a lot of people who are Rebbes.
Yeah.
But for the rest of us, we may want to do it, but even those of us who have kids, right? You can try to tell your kids, you should believe this and you should do this and you should make your bed and you should whatever it is. But there's no guarantee that you're going to succeed. But you just have to keep giving the message when it is appropriate for you to do so. And sometimes, we're going to want to, but again, I think we're in the kind of field where we can't necessarily reach out and tell people things unless they've opened the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Many people don't know that Rockland has a thriving Jewish community. How can libraries reach out?
So I think one of the things that's really important is to understand that many religious communities operate by certain norms that the rest of us don't operate by. A lot of that has to do with gender roles, and specifically with the separation of men and women. So something as innocuous as, okay, we'll just take a book off the shelf, okay? So if Emily's in the library and some Orthodox man comes in and she wants to hand him the book, okay, he may not take it from her hand because there's a concern that he may inadvertently or she may inadvertently make physical contact with him. So, for a secular person, you say, so what's the big deal? Well, fine. But from a religious perspective, for an Orthodox Jew, as well as for other people as well, it is a big deal. Now, whether you think that makes sense or not is not the issue. The point is, that is their belief. And they believe that men and women are not really supposed to be learning together, socializing together, doing a lot of things together. And that's pretty common, whether one is modern Orthodox or, very right-wing Hasidic. I mean, it varies, but so that's a very important thing to understand. And I think it's really, mainly a matter of respect.
Mm-hmm.
If people understand that you respect them, you're treating them, I think most people in the Orthodox community certainly don't expect any special treatment. But, I think, my sermon on Yom Kippur morning was about Black Lives Matter. And one of the lines I said is like, it's not until you can acknowledge that Black lives matter that you can say that all lives matter. And we know this is a whole political discussion, but I said, but if you can't even say Black lives matter, don't respond to all lives matter, because if you can't say Black lives matter, then obviously you don't believe that all lives matter. Black Lives Matter is not seeking special treatment. I'm not talking about an organization. I'm just talking about the idea, the concept. It's just equality. Treat me like a human being. Treat me with respect. Now, we may not always be treated with respect by others. We know that. But our job, and I think this is true whether one works in a library or whether one interacts with other people just in general, our job is to do the right thing. We can't control whether or not other people will, but we're supposed to do the right thing. And if we always try to do the right thing when we interact with others from an Orthodox community, then I think, we can sleep well at night. And I think people, they see it when you're treating them with respect, with just common courtesy and all that. And sometimes we say in Jewish tradition, one of the greatest things you can accomplish is to turn an enemy into a friend. And sometimes, just even if you're not being treated nicely, you continue to treat the person with respect, and then maybe some of those barriers they're putting up will break down.
I think I agree with that. I think that's wonderful. There's still so much anti-Semitism in the world. What do you think libraries specifically can do to combat anti-Semitism in the community?
So I think anti-Semitism is just one of many isms that have to be fought.
Yeah.
And it's obviously much more complicated now, but ultimately, I think programs such as this, where we are able to bring people together, all right, that, whether it's racism or anti-Semitism or homophobia or, whatever it is, so much of that is just from people not having really encountered a lot of people from those communities, at least not knowingly. So I think if we're able to find ways that work for different communities to bring those communities together so that they don't see one another as the other.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so on my father's side, his mother was from originally Hungary, but the family maiden name was Auslander, which you don't even have to know much German, but it's basically, you're a foreigner. You're an Auslander, okay? You're not one of us, you're an Auslander. So I think if we can make everybody feel that, we're all part of one community, whatever we look like, whatever we believe, no matter whom we love, etc., then we really can start to accomplish that. And I think it's easier to do in many ways when we are together. But, the truth is, if you're dealing with the Orthodox community, it may be easier to do sometimes on Zoom, where you don't have to have them physically coming together and, bringing the different genders together. But again, I think the main thing is just knowledge, exposure.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's why I think the library can play such a distinctly unique role, because the whole purpose of a library is enlightenment, is knowledge, is expanding horizons. You know, we live in a society where it's very easy for people to move inward, you know, to contract their horizons. That's easy to do. But I think your whole purpose is to get people to see what else is out there.
Yeah.
Who else is out there?
Yeah, and I believe that libraries are for everyone. So I think that, you know, we can play an integral role. So thank you so much. So those are the end of my questions, but I would like to bring it out to the attendees to see if they have any questions.
There are a couple questions in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is, are there any ways that we should differently approach racism and colorism within Jewish communities compared to that approach for anti-Semitism in the broader community?
So I think if we were to look at the Reform, the conservative, and probably a good part of the modern Orthodox community, I think those communities probably have a very, very small percentage of people who are overtly practicing discrimination. I mean, there certainly is discrimination and racism and all of that, because I think a lot of us have it, whether or not we're aware of it. But I don't think it's generally blatant. I think most of those people probably think of themselves as enlightened people with friends and family members and members of their congregations, et cetera, of all races, religions, ethnicities, et cetera. But the more traditional we become in the Jewish community, there is definitely a sense of us versus them. And that, a lot of that is based on history. And an idea, especially in the Hasidic communities, of putting a fence around the Torah. You know, like many other very religious communities, they don't want to assimilate. They don't want to integrate. Their highest dream would just be to have people leave them alone, let them do their thing, and whether it's New York or Idaho or Venezuela or Israel, it doesn't matter. They just want to do their own thing with their own people, okay? Because there is risk when they are exposed to other people that some of those ideas will then make their way into their own communities. So they definitely do have that sense. Many years ago, I'm going to say 30 years ago or so, which means that most of you here will not remember this. But there was a very disturbing incident that took place at a Reform temple, big Reform temple in, which is no longer around. It's in Ramapo, Temple Beth Am, which if you're Jewish, a lot of you probably knew it. It was the biggest temple in the county on Viola Road, right across the street from the high school. And there had been a big write-up in the Journal News about Temple Beth Am dedicating a Holocaust Torah scroll. And people came and they wrote all this stuff on the glass and papered all kinds of things on the front of the windows of Temple Beth Am in Spring Valley. And the first response was this was anti-Semitism. But then it was very clear it wasn't anti-Jewish, the stuff, it was anti-Israel. And so what we had were Hasidic Jews who were anti-Zionist, okay? And the supervisor of the town of Ramapo, Herb Reisman, who was a wonderful person, convened a meeting of about 50 community leaders, religious, business, etc., all of them Jewish, men, women, etc. And he basically said, you can't do this. You guys have to talk with each other. And so I was part of a group where one of the leading Hasidic rabbis in Ramapo was meeting with me, with a woman Reform rabbi, and with others. But he basically said, you've got to talk with each other, because if you don't talk with each other and you see each other as just categories as opposed to people, this is not going to work. And that model, I think, is ultimately what it's all about. You know, if I see you as, you know, as Brooke, as Bianca, as Joanna, as whatever. I'm seeing you as a person. You're not a category anymore. You're a person. I know you. We've talked. So I think that's ultimately what we need to do. And it's difficult in those communities because they're very, very defensive. But ultimately, I think maybe one of the benefits of this particular age that we're living in is that we might be able to do it since it's online. Of course, some of them don't use computers, but the thing to remember is they're not exactly like us. You know, they're not going on social media and on the computers all the time. Their idea is the holy books. It's prayer, holy books, family, and it's a very simple lifestyle in theory.
The next question in the chat is, since we don't want to assume that someone is Orthodox Jewish person, how would you suggest we serve them or approach them in our libraries? I live very close to Bixby Knolls, a small area in Long Beach, California. Welcome from California, with a large Jewish population.
So, I mean, I don't understand necessarily in terms of as a librarian, somebody working in a library, would you normally go up to people and approach them? I mean, I don't know. I mean, other than, you know, is there something I can help you with? Right. You know, which, I mean, that's, if that's something that you might do, then it's certainly appropriate to do. I would just say that if you were of a different gender than the person you were talking to, I certainly wouldn't put my hand on their shoulder. I mean, nowadays, you know, we're maintaining the distances, of course, but just a recognition that, you know, that is something that could be problematic. Now, I wear a yarmulke. I've worn a yarmulke for, you know, over 35 years all the time. So a lot of times people assume that I'm Orthodox, and I'm not. So it is hard to tell. You know, and up until a year ago, I had a beard for, you know, 8 years or so. So you can't always tell if they got a yarmulke and a beard and they're wearing a white shirt. You know, that's not necessarily a guarantee. So I think, again, it's just courtesy, the way you would approach anybody else. Nobody should be offended by you speaking to them. You know, just asking if there's something they're looking for, or can I help you with anything? I would think that's fine.
Next question is, I'm a teen librarian working at Brooklyn Public Library, and I have struggled with reaching out to yeshivas in order to connect with teens there. Do you have any tips or suggestions for how I can connect with the community I work in?
So I guess I would have two things to say. One is if the person is a male, it's going to be easier because a female is not going to be able to reach out to the male students. Now, they have girls' schools. So what I would say is, especially in an Orthodox and especially in a Hasidic community, you want to make contact with the leadership, because in those communities in particular, everything starts from the top. And if the rabbis permit it or encourage it, then it's going to happen. And if they don't, it won't. So I wouldn't try as a stranger to necessarily make contact with the students. That probably would not be well received, because you're, in a sense, not authorized. If you will, you're not kosher. Or at least they don't know that you're kosher.
Next is Rockland County specific. Are there any resources to get a fairly comprehensive census of Jewish communities in Rockland County? What are the main temples and organizations that we should be aware of?
So probably the easiest way to do that is to contact the Jewish Federation of Rockland County. It is on West Nyack Road in West Nyack, right next to the Salvation Army building, right behind Crossfield and, all of that. And they, I mean, probably most of the rabbis in the county could provide a lot of that information, but that's really the best place. And I would go to jewishrockland.org and, look for the Jewish Federation, because that's kind of like the secular umbrella organization for the county. That's probably the best place to start. But I can tell you that in Rockland County, there are currently 3 Reform temples. The conservative number is probably 7 or 8, and the Orthodox I would not even begin to try to guess.
Next is a follow-up from the story you told earlier at the all the community leaders talking together, and someone just wanted to know if the rabbi, the Hasidic rabbi, spoke to the woman rabbi.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. I mean, we met in his study, in his home, and we met for certainly it was over 6 months. Then there were other issues that had nothing to do with our particular group, and we stopped meeting within a year, but not having to do with, any issues with us. And, it was helpful because, again, it gave us some insight into his world. And this is not somebody who really went around speaking with women, and, certainly not with a woman rabbi. So I'm sure it was very enlightening for him as well.
Next is more of a comment, but I think it's worth bringing up. Someone was commenting on a previous question, and she just mentioned that when she's working with teens and she's not sure what they might be comfortable reading, she takes it slow. So that was that.
I lost you a little bit. She's not comfortable. She's not sure of what they might be comfortable reading. Did you say?
Yes.
So, again, I would ask, Emily mentioned the book Unorthodox, right, earlier?
Yes,
Oh, wait a
yes, I
second.
did.
Did I freeze or something?
No, I can hear you. Rabbi Pernick? Oh,
He froze right after he asked if he froze.
Oh.
So he just
You know what,
he's gonna come back.
Yeah, he texted me. He's trying to reconnect.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
So in the
Okay,
meantime,
can you hear me now?
Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh,
Perfect.
okay.
Okay. All right. I heard you while all that was going on. Okay.
Okay.
I mentioned Emily and the whole thing fell apart. Okay.
I'm bad luck.
So I was mentioning I think you talked about the book Unorthodox before.
Yes, I did earlier in the Zoom.
Right. So I didn't read the book. I saw I saw it on, on TV. And I think your role is not to enforce the religious dictates that they may live by. So I think, again, it's kind of like, can I help you with anything? Can I steer you in any particular direction? Is there something, they may be looking for religious books. They may be looking for secular books. And that's your role. You're not the Rebbe's assistant, right? Or the rabbi's assistant. So I think you're there to serve the consumer who comes through the door. And I think whether they're Hasidic or secular, black, white, any color, any ethnicity, it doesn't really matter. Just that's what your role is. So I would approach them as I would approach anyone else.
Next up, can you
clarify my question? I'm sorry to interrupt. So what I meant was just in terms of like having a program based on someone's religion, or like, for instance, we were going to celebrate Ramadan. So I feel it's important to talk to someone or consult with someone who's more knowledgeable on something like that. So that's what my question was, you know, how would we approach someone if we want to do a program or we want to reach out to the community? Sorry I wasn't more clear, but that's what I meant.
That's okay. No. So again, I think especially in dealing with an Orthodox or a Hasidic community, I would start with the principal or the rabbi or somebody at the top and just talking about, you know, we want the non-Jewish kids to understand your holidays, but we'd like your kids to also have a basic understanding of the holidays of the other kids so that we can all kind of understand each other a little bit. And just say, you know, what we want to do for you, what we want to do for them as well. And again, some people will be open to it, some people won't. And that's human nature. But I think, you know, all we can do is try.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next question is, can you talk about anti-Israel versus anti-Semitism and how to tell the difference?
So it's a very good and a very relevant question. Criticism of Israel is definitely, is not by definition anti-Semitic, because the most critical people in the world of the state of Israel are Israelis. They have more, even in this day when people don't read newspapers, Israel has more newspapers per capita, I believe, than any other country in the world. If you listen to TV, it's basically people yelling about the government and this and that. They are extraordinarily critical of the government, whether it's the Netanyahu government or the Labor Party government before that. Israelis love to criticize their government. Okay. So just being opposed to policies of the state of Israel is definitely not anti-Semitic at all. I think what makes a place or a person anti-Semitic is if they are treating Jews or Israel by a different standard than anyone else. So for example, if one was to say, well, you know, Israel built a security fence because they were having terrorists come over the hills and they felt they needed to do this to protect themselves. All right. And that's wrong and it's terrible and all of that. And then the question is, well, what do you feel about a wall to protect the southern border of the United States so that people don't come in? Well, that's not okay. You know, I mean, we need to have the same standards for everyone. And if we say, well, we have this group of standards or these standards for everybody, but when it comes to Jews or when it comes to Israel, it's different, that's anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, as the case may be. So anti-Semitic is really, well, I guess let me start with one thing with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is a made-up term. The term itself was created in Germany less than 200 years ago. It doesn't mean you're against Semites, okay? It was a term that was coined to refer to hatred of Jews. It's a euphemism for Jew hater, okay? That's what I mean, but it's a little blunt, but that's what it means. You know, instead of saying, well, you're a Jew hater, you're an anti-Semite. It's almost a little bit more intellectual, but that's literally what it means. So in other words, somebody who's like, well, I'm your friend and we can go out and we can do all this. Oh, you know, and then you find out they're Jewish and it's kind of like, oh, well, okay, so maybe I don't want to go out. Maybe we shouldn't do these things. What's changed? Well, I know that you're Jewish. So that's anti-Semitism. Anti-Israel, like I said, there's no problem being opposed to policies of the state of Israel. Many in the Hasidic community are anti-Israel, which surprises some people because there is a traditional Orthodox belief that there should not be a state of Israel or a Jewish state until the Messiah arrives. Now, most Orthodox Jews moved forward. Their concept evolved after 1948 when the State of Israel was created. And so they philosophically were able to work that out. But there still are some in the Hasidic community. They're a minority, but still the Satmar community, which is a huge community. It's Kiryas Joel and parts of Muncie. That's a community that does not believe in the existence of the State of Israel. All right. So sometimes it's difficult to distinguish anti-Israel from anti-Semitic, but I guess I would have to go back to, this might not be the best answer in the world. I believe it was Justice Powell on the Supreme Court back in the 60s who was talking about trying to define pornography. And he said something to the effect of, it's hard to define, but I know it when I see it. So I think I'd probably leave it at that for now.
All right. So the next question is about your personal views. It is, do you support YAFED's efforts to enforce New York State educational standards in yeshivas?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question one more time, please?
Do you support YAFED's efforts to enforce New York State educational standards in yeshivas?
Okay, so I'm not sure what YAFED is, but to answer the question, yes. There is a strong belief in some yeshivas that their whole purpose on earth is to learn Torah, is to learn Jewish teachings, that's what brings the students closer to God. And math, science, English, etc., is at a minimum. There are many other yeshivas that are not like that. But I would absolutely say that Hasidic students need to be prepared to function in our society today. And in order to do that, they...
We lost you for a minute. Could you repeat just the end of that?
Oh, they have...
All right, I think you're back.
Am I back?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Heard that.
Can you hear me or no?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so the answer was yes. I tried to text everyone, but yes, I am a strong believer that yeshiva students should in fact have to follow those basic educational standards.
Okay, and there are two more questions, but it looks like they're related questions, so I'm going to smush them together.
Okay.
So as a children's librarian, I am often asked, where are the Jewish books? They do not mean books about religion, but fiction. They want to know your comments. And then related to that, what is your opinion on using spine labels to help people find books about Judaism with Jewish characters? And they commented, I too am a children's librarian and parents frequently ask for these books. My library used the Jewish interest labels, but they are not really used anymore. I should add that my library serves a Hasidic community.
So I'm not really familiar with, the spine labels. I mean, I learned the Dewey Decimal System, long time ago, but I don't know that I would have a perfect answer for that. And when somebody talked about the Jewish books, I'm not sure what, I mean, in my synagogue, we still have a library in the synagogue, and whether it's the kids' books or the books for adults, they're dealing more with Jewish themes, whether it's holidays or life cycle or, foods, etc. I'm not sure that I'm really able to answer that question,
It's
though.
asked all the time at my branch too. Sorry. Hi, all.
Yeah.
I'm just jumping in.
Please.
It used to, sometimes parents would come in and say, I'm looking for books for a 12-year-old Jewish boy. Where can I find them? And you'd say like, well, what does he like to read? And what has he read before? And they're like, no, where are the books that he can read? Where are the Jewish books? And it's not really organized that way,
Right.
That's why I was
Right.
sort of saying with readers advisory, I just try to take it slow and ask and sort of feel out like what people might be comfortable with reading. But a lot of adults who come in just don't have time for that, and they want to know immediately, like, where are the books that I consider appropriate for my kids, but there's no like easy way to determine that. So
Right.
it's such a struggle all the time.
Are these people necessarily religious?
I mean, again, I don't know. It's just, in the neighborhood that I work in, it's really, really, really common to get that question repeatedly. And so that's sort of why I was asking about school outreach, like, how can I try to connect more to say like, hey, I'm willing to work with you to figure out what types of things you're interested in and what you would like to read and how I can better serve you, instead of just trying to do it one by one when families come to the branch.
Right.
Or when someone says like, oh, I've read this, I've read this, but I'm not allowed to read that, or that. So what's left? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't want to,
right.
I don't want to put a kid in a tough position because they bring a book home that they're not supposed to have, but also like, I don't want to police them either. So,
correct.
Like,
I think what I would recommend is, I don't know for a fact, but I would guess that there is some type of an organization, which is maybe a Jewish librarians organization, that might be able to guide you in this direction, or some, there are tons of Jewish books, and there are Jewish book publishers, and okay, I see some of the comments, in terms of spine labels that might have had different labels on them for, different races or religions or ethnicities. So I don't know that I have the answer, but I would be surprised if there wasn't some type of a Jewish organization that could focus on this. And if there isn't, I know some people who are librarians who happen to be Jewish and who probably would have a better answer than I can provide to that.
Can I just ask though, like, are you offended by the idea of putting, like, of just the idea of a label that says like, like Jewish collection or Jewish themed?
Oh, I mean, look, if somebody had a book about, I don't know, could be a book about Israel. Now, that's not specifically limited to Jews, because there are a lot of Christians and there are Muslims and there are secular people and there are historians and whatever who will have an interest in Israel. You can have a book about Passover, and you can have people who aren't Jewish who want to know about Passover. It's the basis for, or all different customs, etc. So no, I mean, I wouldn't think that at all. I mean, again, you could talk about the Holocaust, which is its own, whole section of a library in and of itself, potentially. But in a sense, I mean, what distinguishes the Holocaust from other genocides is that, Hitler's focus was on the Jews. It's not that he didn't want to wipe out other people, but his primary focus was on the Jews. So, theoretically, that could fit in a Jewish interest section, but it's not exclusively Jewish. I certainly wouldn't be offended by that. And similarly, if I wanted to know something about, I don't know, let's say Bethlehem, all right? well, I've been to Bethlehem several times, but if I was in a library, and maybe it would be under Christian interest. But if there was something I wanted to know about, I mean, I have no problem looking up a book that's, labeled Christian interest or Muslim interest or, Uzbekistan interest or, whatever it might be. It's a question of, that's what I want to know. That's where I go. I don't think that's offensive at all.
Okay, thank you.
But Bianca, thank you so much for trying to reach out. And I know what you're saying. It's, I guess Thomas Dewey didn't have that in mind back in whenever, maybe we have to update it to the Bianca decimal system or something.
Those are the last questions I see in the chat. There are certainly definitely more comments, and everyone is welcome to go to the chat to read them. Did I miss any questions? And does anyone have anything else you would like to ask? All right. Emily, I'll hand it back over to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rabbi Pernick, and thank you so much to everyone who attended. This was an amazing webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. We're so thrilled for you to be here. For everyone that's attending, remember, if you need a continuing ed certificate, please contact me. You can either reply to the email that I'll be sending out, or again, my email address is jen@RCLS on behalf of RCLS. Thank you to the Coalition for co-sponsoring. Thank you, Rabbi Pernick. This was fantastically wonderful. And I hope further conversations come from this. So thank you so much.
Can I just add that, I know that I have on occasion contacted one of our local librarians for a question about something or other. If you do have a question about something that you feel that you need a Jewish resource and you don't necessarily have one, I'm just putting my email address in the chat and just say, hey, it's me. I was at the program back on October 5th and, I'm happy to help you.
Thank you. And I do have actually one further question. You mentioned the importance of having these sort of sessions to open up communication and conversation, and that's how stigma is erased, right? Is this something you'd be willing to do for libraries outside of Rockland County?
Sure.
With speaking with the communities, because I know Emily had stated it was so well received, your previous session with her library. So for all of the attendees, yeah, that's great. Thank you. Something to keep in mind when considering future programming. So excellent, excellent. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.